Welcome, heroes and villains, to Fjook Enterprises YouTube channel. As always, I'm Fjook. Today we're going to be continuing. This video is part of Conversations with Fjook. I'm going to continue my GM interviewing, but I'm going to let the person I'm interviewing introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Bradley, and I have been playing games, well, RPGs for 35 years, thereabouts.
So, how did you start 35 years ago into the tabletop hobby?
Well, I'd moved from a small village into the town of Prestwick, which is in the west coast of Scotland. And it's one of those small towns with like a single sort of main street. And one of the shops there was called SB Hobbies. And it was primarily sold model railway kits and scenery and so on. But at the back of the shop, they had role-playing games and little figures and things like that. And it fascinated me. And I always liked sort of fantasy films and things like that. So I kind of naturally gravitated towards them. And then I saw that film Mazes and Monsters with Tom Hanks, which supposedly, the legend is, was meant to be a warning to people not to play games like Dungeons and Dragons. But it fascinated the hell out of me. It made me want to play them after I watched that film.
So, what systems have you played exactly?
Oh, wow. D&D, the old Beckme system from the 80s was the one I started on. I've played AD&D First Edition. I've played D&D 5th. I've also played MERP, Rolemaster, Space Master, Palladium Fantasy, Traveller, a lot of Traveller, Call of Cthulhu, 3rd Edition, 4th Edition, 7th Edition currently. Savage Worlds, Dragon Age, I could go on. I've played a lot of games.
How'd you go from being a player to being the game master?
Well, I don't think I'm unusual, but it's certainly different for me. When I first started playing, none of the people that I was playing with had ever played before. So it was one of those situations where one of us had to be the GM, and I drew the short straw. And so I was GMing games for a long time before I actually got to play. So in a way, it was the other way around for me. I GM far more than I played. So yeah, kind of different for me.
Since you've played so many systems, are there any that you refuse to run?
There's games that I used to run, like MERP, like Space Master, even Palladium Fantasy, which I wouldn't run now. My old and addled brain, they're quite in depth and quite complex, and my old and addled brain can't handle them. Also, there's the infamous game Fatal, which I'd heard all the sort of horror stories about, and I clicked a link and it showed someone had the PDF of it online, and I read the sort of opening bit of that, and I went, "You've got to be kidding!" That is a game I would refuse to play, run. I wouldn't want to be in the person's company who would even want to.
I've never heard of this game. What is it?
It is well, the author swears that it's 930 pages, is the fantasy simulation. The combat system is a complex formula But the thing that puts a lot of people off is that there are rules on how to role play a rape.
Okay, then.
And as part of your character generation, you do, as part of, most games will do like height and weight. This one goes into, shall we say, various circumferences, how much girth you have.
Okay, then.
The guy keeps saying, well, this stuff happens. I'm like, yeah, sadly, stuff like that happens. I don't want to role play it. I don't want it in my games.
Okay. Switching gears, what systems do you enjoy running?
First, foremost, always Castle Falkenstein. If any of my usual players ever see this video, they will. I'm pretty sure they will take bets on how far into the video it's taken me to mention the game. So that's about 6 minutes. I bought that game in the mid-90s. It is still my number one game to this day. Cult's first edition is another one. Of modern games, I really like Savage Worlds and True 20, which are both generic systems. And the age system as well. I still stand by the opinion that I think that Dragon Age, the Dragon Age RPG, is the best beginner's game I've ever seen.
Do you have any, since you've been running games for 35 years, do you have any common house rules?
There's a few, but they're kind of subtle ones. Castle Falkenstein, this is where we really start hearing me name this game again and again. I apologize, but it's my number one. Essentially, it's I think to help with maths, it says that there are 200 pennies in an English pound. Just to explain, Castle Falkenstein is Victorian steampunk. But for me, being British, I know that it was 240 pennies to the pound, so I changed that straight away. Savage Worlds, I like to give bennies back for good role playing. If someone comes up with a really great idea, even if it doesn't pay off, if I think the idea is great, I give them a penny back. And if they happen to make a skill roll or do a ton of damage,
Can you grab my
then I do that as well.
The spare room downstairs. So are there any moments of the players completely surprising you?
Yeah, I was running a game, Falkenstein again. I was running a game where someone had taken control of all the dragons, and the dragons were basically dive bombing and having their way with all the major cities in Europe. If you can imagine that scene from the last season of Game of Thrones, where Daenerys is on the dragon causing hell at King's Landing, that kind of thing, but happening in all the major cities. And my players were taking an airship. They were going to China because they realized the sort of big emperor dragon there was the one behind it. But on their way, they passed Berlin, and they saw that Berlin had been really damaged, massive, and they could see all the sort of people were struggling. So they ended up just landing, and they took a fair chunk of the game actually putting things right and getting things sorted and setting up the internal structures and making sure the buildings were getting redone and all the wounded were getting properly tended to. I expected them to go straight on to China, but it went somewhere far more interesting. And I like that when players will do something completely in character, but so much more interesting than I thought it was going to be. They were there for ages. It was great.
Are there any moments that come to your mind when you think of everything going to plan?
Two of them actually. Two of them. I'll get Falkenstein out the way first. I had written a game called Gin and Tonic. Gin, as in the genie, and essentially it was a snake oil salesman in America who was selling a wonder tonic, but it was actually he was actually siphoning the magical energy off a gin to fuel this tonic. And that game went pretty much to plan. I really enjoyed that. There wasn't any hiccups for me with the game at all. It wasn't that it was linear or anything. The players just really went for it. The other one was Call of Cthulhu. I ran a game many, many years ago because I always have a problem with Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu has this thing where oftentimes when you've got experienced players, it doesn't always happen. It happens where they'll make Call of Cthulhu characters, where they're making characters that they know have got a good chance of surviving in a Call of Cthulhu game, whether or not that particular character with that background would actually have those skills and abilities. They happen to know that, regardless of who they are, they're going to have amazing spot hidden rolls, and they always have amazing spot hidden rolls. So I decided to do something different rather than use the sort of elder gods and Cthulhu and all the sort of the pantheon for the mythos. I ported over this pantheon of dragon gods from the Palladium fantasy game, and I used them as the main villains. And it was a cult dedicated to them, and it just created an unusual vibe for those players because it wasn't something they were expecting, and I liked that. It worked for me, and the scenario went really well. I really enjoyed it.
As a last question to this interview, do you have any advice to fellow game masters out there?
There's two pieces of advice. One of them is more suited to sort of newer GMs or people who are about to. My first piece of advice, especially for newer GMs, is don't be afraid to fail. Your first game as a GM is not going to flow smoothly. You are going to be looking up things in books. You are going to have to double check things. It will go slower. There will be a different pace to someone who's experienced, and that's fine. It's not going to be a perfect game, but that's how you learn. You start slow, you start small, and you build, and you become a better GM because of it. My main bit of advice to all GMs is, please remember, it's a game. At the end of the day, we're all having fun. I remember getting into a debate with someone who was talking about the skill of piloting. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you've got a character who's got a skill in piloting, they know how to fly a plane. So they'll go in and they sit in the cockpit and they'll roll the skill, and they've whatever checks they need to do, they do, and then they take off. This GM was like, no, you need to tell me as a player, what checks you're doing, what order you're going to do the checks in. And I'm like, but the player's not the flipping pilot. The character is. Yes, but if the player doesn't know, then they don't get to be. They can't fly if they don't know. And I'm like, missing the point. And it kind of annoyed me. And I've seen more than my fair share of power GMs where games masters are they position themselves as being in direct opposition to the players. They're not there to create a challenge for the players to overcome. They're actually there to actually get at the players, and I don't like that in games. It's why I've never been a fan of Paranoia. I don't mind it for Toon, because Toon is just everyone's playing a cartoon character and you can't actually die. But as a rule, I don't like GMs being confrontational in games where they feel that they can win if they can kill all the players. I've had a GM or two be like that, and I don't approve of it. That's my serious bit for the day.
Well, thank you for joining us in this conversation.
Not a problem.
I hope you comment, subscribe, and like the video. I'll see you in the next video.